Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Joe Sternberg and Mary O'Grady, and talking about the political impact of inflation. And Joe's talking, Mary, about real incomes. I think the very salient point is that the powers that be in Washington, the president in particular, and I think a lot of the press corps, they've looked at a lot of the macroeconomic data, strong unemployment, strong GDP growth, and they say, man, happy days are here again. Why don't you folks get it? And their basic argument is, look, the problem isn't us. It's you. It's you American consumers. You don't get it. You don't know how good you have it. Always a dicey political argument.
Well, I think Joe put his finger on it there when he was talking about the price level, because the price level is what people are looking at. They're not looking at how much prices went up between last month and this month, but they know that since this inflation problem started, the price level is up significantly. Wages, not so much. And, I think one of the things that we forget in this country, because we have not suffered the kind of inflation that, for example, you've seen in Latin America, is generally people don't catch up. You never catch up. This is why you try with everything you have at the central bank not to get in this problem. Because if you try to catch wages up to the change in the price level, you end up with a spiral. So you hold down wages to knock out the inflation problem. The other thing is that I think it's just maddening for a lot of people that the Biden administration created this thing that they called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is basically throwing a lot more money into the economy in the form of subsidies. And a lot of structural things have changed. But one thing that has not changed is that inflation is still too many dollars chasing too few goods. And that's the problem that Jay Powell is trying to deal with here by draining accommodation. The fiscal side of the balance sheet, the executive, the government could help him by doing two things. One, stop throwing money into the economy in the form of subsidies. And two, do more to stimulate supply side production. We still get a lot of mixed messages from the Biden administration about energy production. And if he wants to do something about that gasoline price, he should encourage more oil drilling in this country, but he doesn't do that.
The president said in a response to the March Consumer Price Index in a statement, fighting inflation remains my top economic priority. Yikes, what if it was a lower economic priority? What would have happened? But let's listen to the president give us something of a mixed message here on social spending.
We'll also restore the expanded child care tax credit, lifting millions of children out of poverty. And by the way, this helps the economy. It doesn't hurt it helps the economy. Our Republican friends let that expire. Well, we got to expire a couple of them politically in order to get this passed. Together, we're going to bring it back.
Together, we're going to bring that subsidy back. The president talks about subsidies across the board. I mean, the electric vehicle subsidies are going to be upwards of $1 trillion. $1 trillion over the course of several years here from the Inflation Reduction Act. And all that, Joe, has contributed to inflation. So the president, to be fair to him, this is the economic model he's grown up with. His economic advisors think so, right? It's the old spending multiplier. You get $1 of spending and you get $1.7 worth of return on growth. But what they're ignoring, first of all, that's nonsense. I think economic evidence shows that the multiplier really isn't that high. But the other thing is it discounts inflation and the impact on prices. And the president, in his statement, was really at pains to try to say things are just terrific. Prices are still too high for housing and groceries, he says, even as prices for key household items like milk and eggs are lower than a year ago. Oh my, milk and eggs are lower, but they're still up enormously from what they had been. So this is a bad political story for him.
Yes, and it is only going to get worse because, as you've pointed out, Paul, he and his advisors just don't have a clear handle on what the solution was. And that solution is kind of staring us in the face. Mary described inflation as too much money chasing too few goods, and there are two solutions to that. You can reduce the amount of money that's chasing all of those goods. That's what the Fed has been trying to do. That is what the Biden administration is not doing when they create all of these subsidies that are supposed to pour out into the economy for consumption of certain goods like EVs or solar panels or any of the rest of it. But the other thing you can do is attack the other half and produce more. Mary hit on one important point. You could produce more energy. You could look at tax or regulatory policies that would encourage more production in the economy. And yet that is the solution that the Biden administration and a lot of his Democratic allies steadfastly resist, even though that is also the key to unlocking real wage growth for households. Your wages go up in inflation-adjusted terms when the economy is more productive, but you can only get there with the kind of policies that the Biden administration is resisting so stubbornly. And so because they have those ideological blinkers on potential solutions to this problem, it's just hard to see it getting any better for them between now and the election.
Donald Trump, of course, jumped on inflation, sent out a list of all the goods and the percentage that they've increased, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, over the course of the Biden presidency. Donald Trump really isn't saying he'll control spending either, which is a problem. He's not focused on any solution himself, I think, to inflation other than to criticize Biden. Maybe he will get there before this election campaign is over. But I think just as abortion policy is emerging as the biggest Republican vulnerability in this election, inflation remains the biggest Democratic vulnerability, that and the border, I think, but inflation more than anything else. And I say that because of the fact that it affects particularly low-income voters and working-class voters because they have the less ability to get increases in wages. And they're the ones who feel it most acutely when they buy energy, buy food, the two staples of household spending, or if their rent goes up, or if their child is in their 20s and wants to buy a home. Suddenly, it's a pretty big nut if you want to borrow.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, back in the dark ages when you and I were just writing about Paul Volcker and the last big struggle
those
we
were
had
the golden ages, Mary.
There was something called the misery index where you combine the inflation with the unemployment rate. I think there's a new misery index, which it's heavily still about inflation, but it's also about other things in the economic basket that are affecting people and general quality of life. So you have this inflation pressure, which means that the discretionary income in your household is shrinking. And then you're looking at crummy public schools, you're looking at crime problems. So when I think about the disadvantages that the Democrats are up against, inflation is kind of behind a lot of these other things that I would classify as quality of life. And in the end, when you do all the math, the conclusion you come to is that you're not better off under Joe Biden and you want change.
All right. I think we shall leave it there. We'll see where the inflation story goes in the coming months. It's going to be a big impact on the election, no matter which way it goes. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Joe. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, and thank you for listening.